Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining the first ever virtual DOE Office of Indian Energy Program Review. And I'm getting a little feedback, so hopefully you all are not. Next slide, please. So first, I do want to apologize if those of you who have joined us for prior sessions and you've already heard these introductions, you probably memorized who all we are, but I do want to introduce our entire team for those of you who are just joining for this particular session. So by way of introduction, for those of you I have not met yet, my name is Lasana Pierce, and I've been doing this a long time, and every time I say it, I feel older. But I have had the privilege, the pleasure, and the honor of working with Indian tribes and many Alaska Native villages with their energy development for over 20 years. I am a mechanical engineer by degree. I pursued an MBA, and in my current position as deployment supervisor, I support the office by executing the deployment program. This is comprised of first, financial assistance through our competitive grants, technical assistance, which is free of charge to tribes and eligible tribal entities, and education and outreach programs. Additionally, I manage the national funding opportunity announcements and act as a project officer for some of the resulting grants and agreements that you'll hear today. Also help implement the outreach through our website, email, newsletters, and oversee sort of laboratory support, contractor support agreements, and things like that. I do want to, on this slide, highlight James Jensen. He is second from the left in that bottom picture. He'll be helping us moderate the Q&A session. Next slide, please. So next, I want to introduce one of the newest members of our federal team, although he's not a new member to the team, but Dr. Tommy Jones. And I have to say the picture on the top is an old picture. He looks so young in that picture. But anyway, so Tommy Jones from Jones, Oklahoma. He's an enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, Naknek Village Council, and a native shareholder of Bristol Bay Native Corporation of Alaska as well. So Dr. Jones joined the office as an intern. That's when I think that pictures was taken, actually, while he was finishing his PhD in natural resource studies and his dissertation, which analyzed the barriers to renewable energy development on tribal lands. He and another intern, Les Nesper, as part of their internship, developed a report that's posted on our website on those barriers to renewable energy development on tribal lands, if you're interested. Since then, Tommy joined the office here in Golden as a contractor, and not even a month ago joined us as a federal employee, so we're keeping him. Tommy will help us by staying on time. I'm sure we have one presenter for this session, so I'm sure we don't need any timekeeping. But anyway, he's had the hard job of breaking in and telling people they only have 5 minutes left. So I'm going to maybe turn it over to Tommy if you want to say a few words.
Thank you, Lasana. And hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining today, and thank you for the presenters for doing great presentations once again. We do have another day tomorrow as well. And for those this is your first time attending one of these, we do normally do this in person in Colorado. And it's a great event to see what other communities are doing across the nation and get ideas about things that you can do in your own community. And so we encourage people to continue following our different announcements that we have. And thank you again for everyone. Okay.
Thank you, Tommy. Next slide, please. And sorry. So next, I'd like to introduce Miss Tweety Doe, Doe as in DOE. I think it was destined, and we have a long connection as well. So it was destined. Anyway, another member of our team is Tweety Doe. She's duty stationed with Tommy and I and our contractor team for the grants in Colorado. It's a national program, but we support all the projects across all of Indian country. She's a project officer for many of the different projects you'll hear this week. And as a project officer, she will administer financial assistance awards to Indian tribes and Alaska Native villages and tribal and intertribal organizations. Before joining the Office of Indian Energy, Tweedy served 8 years with the DOE's Office of Energy Efficiency Renewable Energy, ERE, as a project officer under the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program. If you all recall the Recovery Act, we do. It's ingrained in our history, in our memory. And then later as a program management analyst with ERE's Project Management Coordination Office. But before joining DOE, which is where I originally had met Tweedy, when she worked with the Council of Energy Resource Tribes, for those who recall, CERT, if you will, at which time she gained some valuable experience working with tribal leadership on energy resource planning and management, and gained an understanding of tribal communities that have diverse needs, resources, and visions. Ms. Doe has a Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science at the University of Washington and a Master's of Arts in International Studies with emphasis on economics and human rights from the University of Denver. She obtained her Project Management Professional PMP certification, which is pretty prestigious, in 2013. She's also a Certified Project Officer and Certified Contracting Officer Representative. And I'm going to hand the mic over to her a little bit later. So we're going to go on to the next slide, and she can say a few words when I give her the virtual mic here. Okay, so for those who are just joining us for this session, and for those that have heard this sometimes before, I apologize, but I did want to give a sense of who we are, and we did do a program overview on Monday, and that will be recorded and the slides presented if you're interested in that as well. But a sense of our office and the rest of our team. The Office of Indian Energy currently has 9 federal employees, and in retrospect, it is over twice as many as the 4 federal employees we had last November during the program review. So we've more than doubled in size. 4 of those federal staff are in DC, 3 in Colorado, Tommy, Tweedy, and I, and 2 in Alaska. We also have contractor support, which I'm sure many of you know are our wonderful project monitors, which we're all a team here. So we have 2 contractors supporting headquarters in DC, and 6 in Colorado supporting the National Financial Assistance Program and grants. We also have some support from the DOE Golden Field office, who, along with the Colorado-based Indian Energy staff and contractors, are co-located also with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Golden, Colorado. But through DOE's Golden Field office, we get procurement, legal, and NEPA support. And I must say that they're terrific. Most of the legal and procurement and NEPA folks have been with us for many years, as our core team. A lot of us have been together for many years. Next slide, please. And there we are, most of us, half of us. This was at the last program review, so not everybody is pictured here, but I did want to at least, allow you to get sort of a face to a name. So starting with the back row, we have James Jensen. He's going to be doing the Q&As. Next to him is Chris Fenema, both contractors supporting the deployment program from Colorado. Next, we have Givy Kokanowski, federal staff member. He's duty stationed in Anchorage, Alaska. And next to Givy is Director Kevin R. Frost, who, unfortunately, he gets to be in Washington, D.C. I say unfortunately because I don't think I'd want to be in Washington, D.C., but you never know. So in the front row, we have Jamie Alley on the far left, myself, Jen Luna, who's team lead for the contractor staff in Colorado. Next to Jen is Tweedy Doe. And next to Tweedy is Susan Manley, contract support in Colorado as well. And next is Jasmine Anderson. She supports Director Frost in DC. And on the far right is Tommy Jones. And again, since this picture was taken last November, there's many new members that I wanted to bring to your attention. Since last November, Gibby Kokonowski has taken a senior policy advisor position. He remains duty stationed in Anchorage, Alaska. Gibby has recently been joined by Alan Verbitsky, who's not shown in this picture, but he is an engineer and has a wealth of knowledge and experience with energy systems, as well as working with Alaska Native villages. Since he's joined us, he's got the opportunity to return home to Alaska. And he has lots of relatives there as well. So Brad Petrasic, who is not shown here, he's previously with DOE's Office of Environmental Management and has a history of working with tribes. He joined the office as a senior advisor. He's duty stationed in Washington, D.C. as well. Director Frost, shown in the back row, as I said, second from the right. He's been joined in D.C. by Gwentella Wilson, who's our budget officer, and Paulette Toole, our new management analyst. So he finally got some support, which is wonderful. And a very recent addition to our office, as I said before, is Tommy Jones. And he joined the office as a federal staff member, as a deployment specialist, so sort of my sidekick, if you will. On the contractor side, not shown is Jessica Becker. She joined us, yes, during the COVID and everything. She joined the team in Colorado. She's actually physically in Canada at the moment. She joined as the project monitor, supporting the financial assistance grants and agreements across the nation as well. Okay, next slide. Before we jump into the project presentations, let's go over some event details. So today's webinar is being recorded, and it will be available on DOE's Office of Indian Energy website in a couple weeks. We will post copies of the presentation slides on the website as well. I say shortly, I'm not sure, but a couple days probably. Everyone will receive a post-event email with the link to the page where all of the slides and the recordings eventually will be located. Because we are recording this webinar, all phones have been muted. We will answer your written questions at the end of the final presentation of the session, which there's just one really long one during this session. So you can see all the wonderful things the Forest County Potawatomi Community is doing. So please submit your questions at any time by clicking the questions button located in the webinar control box on your screen and typing in your questions. I'm going to skip that part because there's only 1%. So next, I'm going to turn it over to Tweety to introduce our presentations for this session. Tweety, it's all yours.
Thank you, Lizana, and welcome everyone to session 8 of our virtual annual program review. But I think what I'm going to dub this session as is Sarah's session. The purpose of our annual program review is to hear from our grant recipients report on their projects because it is a requirement of accepting a grant from the Office of Indian Energy. Our presenters provide updates on their projects and share the lessons they have learned with all of us. So we can not do the same mistakes or, do something that worked out right. And in normal times, our program review also provides an opportunity for seeing old friends and networking with new partners. I miss seeing you and all the snacks that we have during our in-person program review. In this virtual format, we invite you to listen to Sarah and think about one thing maybe that stands out and ask questions for Sarah, especially those tough ones. She can handle it using the chat function on the right side of your screen. In the previous 7 sessions, we have already heard from 21 grant recipients on their projects across diverse tribal lands. For this session 8, we will hear from award-winning Sarah Drescher on 4 projects at the Forest County Potawatomi Community. Sarah, you are on.
Terrific. Well, hello, and first I'd like to just start by thanking the Department of Energy for pulling this together. I know it's a little bit of a departure from the way that things usually are. I jokingly told Lizana earlier that I wasn't going to be as engaging this time. I took out a lot of the jokes from from my slides to just get through things. So I am Sarah Drescher. I am the Environmental and Energy Senior Attorney for the Forest County Potawatomi Community. I have helped with their energy program for 7 or 8 years now. Next slide. And this is a background slide. We're going to go through just a little background for the Forest County Potawatomi. They were part of a confederacy of the Ojibwa, Ottawa, and the Potawatomi, known as the Council of Three Fires. They were largely tribes that were around the Great Lakes and then forced out through various treaties. Next slide. So up until the 16th century, they occupied 30 million acres around the Great Lakes, living closely with the neighboring tribes. And then through a series of treaties were forcefully removed. The Forest County Potawatomi is the tribe that would not move. So they fled to the northern reaches of the state of Wisconsin and established a reservation. Next slide. And this is a depiction of the Potawatomi land base. This is in Forest County, Wisconsin, which is a little northeast of the central part of the area. Next slide. And for the Forest County Potawatomi, you can see that the land base is really spread out. So the tribe's casino is in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and then there are various other locations where they have different lands. The primary focus for its energy projects are in that large grouping of dots in the, again, northeast corner of the state, and then in the Milwaukee area. Next slide. And for the tribe, the tribe's energy program largely grew out of its environmental mission. I will let everybody read that on their own. But the tribe has had a number of challenges over the years, as many tribes have. With reservation status, you're living on a forest piece of land, and you are dependent on what that area provides and what you can use that area for. So protecting that area and the environment along with it becomes exceptionally important, not just for the Forest County Potawatomi, but for all tribes. Next slide. And so the tribe, based on that environmental mission statement, started some planning in order to execute its energy goals. And some of those important elements were to make sure that the energy project had the cultural values of the tribe in mind, and that those values were communicated accurately to all of the tribal members, and that the plans for each of the projects were also communicated. Next slide. So from that, they worked through that planning stage to establish protocols to implement both the energy mission statement and specific energy projects. So they developed procedures for reviewing energy projects and determining whether or not they made sense based on the tribe's priorities and based on what it was that the tribe wanted to accomplish. Next slide. So one of the things that came out of that report and that planning was the importance of delegating appropriate individuals to champion energy work. And so the tribe created a sustainable energy position and then also created an energy working group. And that group is formed out of different division managers and appointed individuals, all of which have interest in the tribe's energy work. Next slide. So as part of their initiatives, the background that they have in the environment is really supporting why it is that the tribe is making these decisions. The tribe has achieved Class 1 air redesignation. It has been a member of both Governor Doyle's and the current governor's climate change task force, Project Greenfire, in which it audited all of its facilities, and it purchases renewable energy credits, certificates for all of the power that it uses that is not green generated power. Next slide. So Project Greenfire was a comprehensive initial project which did an energy audit of all of the tribe's buildings. And the initial, they identified 100 improvements that they could make right away. And those initial efficiencies eliminated over 13,000 tons of CO2. And so as we move forward, we continue to do additional audits and then also continue to develop green energy projects. Next slide. One of those green energy projects is the Milwaukee Biodigester. The Biodigester is a 2 megawatt anaerobic digester that creates biogas by feeding off of liquid pumpable food wastes, and it receives income from a combination of tipping fees. The individuals that divert their waste from landfills to the digester pay the tribe to take their waste, and then the tribe sells the electricity generated through the 2 1 megawatt engines to the local utility. Next slide. There it comes. So this is a picture on the lower portion of the screen, those 2 large tanks. That is the digester, which you can see it's located in a very urban area right next to the casino. Next slide. So now I will start with the individual projects. And this is just by way of background. In 2013, the DOE gave the tribe a grant to install approximately 950 kilowatts of solar power on 13 government buildings. And in that project, we used a investment tax credit structure where the tribe partnered with a taxable entity to create an LLC. With that project, we found that our solar offsets ranged between 20 and 97%. So we're utilizing that same structure for one of the projects that I'll be speaking about today. But I think what's important to me is that going back to the 2013 project, I think we've learned a lot of lessons, and we've been able to, each time that we've received grants, we've been able to increase the amount of solar that we install, decrease costs, and really provide very beneficial programs for the tribe. Next slide. With the current, one of the projects that we will be talking about today, the 2019 grant, with the 2013, 2017, and 2019 grants, and one additional system that the tribe installed, the tribe will own and operate over 3 megawatts of solar photovoltaic. So with the original 2013 project, what we found is that the payoffs were anywhere between about 2 years to up to approximately 10 years. And that's a simple payoff just by using the cost of diverted savings from the energy that we would not be buying from the utility. So utilizing that model, next slide, we were able to then create our 2017 project. One of the things that our 2017 projects were initially designed to do was work together. So one project is the 2017 Developing Residential Baselines and EEMs. And one of the reasons we wanted to develop those residential baselines was to then allow for solar energy on tribal housing. We ran into some issues with that based on ownership, insurance, and other factors. And so we did end up retooling the 2017 photovoltaic project. However, we still found some very useful information out of the Developing Residential Baselines project. So next slide. So while they were initially intended to work hand in hand, we were going to first develop those residential baselines on 115 to 130 homes and find ways to reduce energy consumption and increase energy efficiency. So obviously we needed to do data gathering and conduct individual home audits. And then we presented those findings to individual homeowners. Next slide. And that really included a lot of outreach, informational meetings, door-to-door visits. There were a number of mass mailings. We had to create a form to allow for the tribe to collect the energy bills from the utilities, since each of those bills was in the individual tribal member's name. But the outreach really proved to be very important because it engaged the community in a way that made the community very interested in some of the tribe's other energy efforts. Next slide. So with the 2017 project for homes, we had a total of 74 tribal homes and 45 tribal rentals that we were able to prepare certain audits for, that we were able to go into and review. Next slide. And many of what we found, very similar in a northern Wisconsin environment, was that much of it boiled down to simple fixes: inadequate insulation, missing weather seals, flow underneath doorways, not utilizing exhaust fans, and many other individual items that, once added together, could create very impressive conservation opportunities. Next slide. So our goal was to do audits for 115 homes. We've had 119 sign up to participate. And we continue to leverage as many financing opportunities as possible. So we do try to use Focus on Energy funds, which is the Wisconsin program that individual homeowners can tap into to provide support for certain energy efficiency fixes. Next slide. And additionally, the tribe initially was providing a small stipend for each individual homeowner who went through the process to do some of those fixes as well. So although the project was modified a couple of times to perform those audits from not only homes, but also to some larger scale living situations, the men's, women's, transitional living facilities, elder care, it still was found that the circumstances across all of those different buildings, all of those residential facilities, were very similar. The project has been extended based on some changes in staffing and based on some changes in workforce. Obviously, it's been difficult to do in-home audits and to provide in-home meetings with tribal members. The pandemic restrictions obviously are in place to keep everybody safe. And so we continue to try to do as much as we can virtually, but are certainly looking forward to getting back to the interaction with tribal members. Next slide. So these are some of the challenges that we have faced. Staffing has changed a little bit over the last couple of years, but this project has been moving forward. We did not estimate appropriately the amount of time it would take to get information from various entities such as the utilities. So that kind of put a hold on things for a while. The data entry has taken longer than expected. Obviously, it's one thing if you have a dedicated individual that can do all of this work, but as all tribes, each individual that we have working for this has a number of other job requirements as well. The trade ally certification process, which was one way that we thought of kind of duplicating some money within the tribe, that process allows for a tribal business to go through the trade ally certification and then receive Focus on Money dollars from the state of Wisconsin. And it's not an easy process to get involved with. So various different challenges have popped up. We've continued to try to push through those. And for the most part, it's just been a change in timing. Next slide. So we still have training to attend to receive certain certifications, and we are going to continue with the audits. And then we're really looking forward to starting to implement some of the EEMs and really encouraging more and more members to double dip on the focus on energy dollars so that some of the projects can be implemented to a larger scale. Next slide. And then that brings us to the 2017 Community Scale Solar Project. Next slide. So in this project, and this project is actually, I think I am in the last reporting cycle right now. This was a community scale solar project. The DOE contributed $1 million and FCPC matched $1 million. And again, we used a tax equity investor. So FCPC and the tax equity investor created an LLC. The equity investor could then take 5 years of ITC credits. And then 5 years later, the tribe would then own the project entirely. Next slide. So originally, we had discussed tribal housing and select government buildings. The dynamics proved very challenging. We would have had to have PPAs with individual homeowners. The DOE grants require tribal ownership over the panels. Leases with certain homeowners would be complicated. We would need to redraft several of those. We will talk about this a little bit more later, but Wisconsin does not have solar garden or net metering that make large-scale installations feasible. So we couldn't do, for example, a subdivision and then just do one large installation of solar in a nearby field. So we found a lot of challenges with the tribal housing portion of it. I think that has worked for a number of tribes. For those tribes, oftentimes they do own much of the housing, or they have agreements in place with homeowners prior to going to DOE for the grants themselves. So it becomes a little bit easier. Next slide. One thing we found, though, that we liked about changing the scope of the project is that by looking past the residential aspects, we were able to increase the amount of solar that we were able to install through the grant. So the revised project focused on government buildings and enterprises only. It allowed for much more solar installed. We ended up going from, I believe, initially we were targeting 750 kW, and we ended up over 1 megawatt. So the Executive Building, Health and Wellness Center, and the Potawatomi Carter Casino Hotel were the identified buildings that took on that 1 megawatt plus of solar. Next slide. So by focusing on that larger installation, FCPC was able to reduce more of its grid-sourced electric, and I actually have the wrong number in here. The revised project is just over 1 megawatt, not by much, and the cost per megawatt was reduced significantly. So it was a really good way to revamp and reconsider what we could get with those federal dollars. Next slide. So PCCH, one of the installations, is over 800 kW, and it is the largest in the WPS service territory. And one of the problems with that is that WPS is in northern Wisconsin and has very aging lines and very aging infrastructure, like many different utilities in tribal areas. So there were some cost increase for upgraded equipment. The system had to be able to phase on and phase off should WPS need to do that. So we had to provide for both dual metering and different phase infrastructure. And it was difficult to find one facility that could take this amount of energy. Obviously, solar can only be utilized during the day unless you've got battery storage. Wisconsin, WPS service territory, has a 20 kW net metering. mechanism. So anything over that, there is no net metering. So at that point, you are selling back to the utility at approximately 2.5 cents per kW. So in the long run, it doesn't make a lot of sense to install more than you're going to use at facilities that are faced with those types of requirements. And then we also ran into a complication with the health and wellness roof warranty. We were in jeopardy of negating that warranty. We were able to work through that, but it did not come without complications. Next slide. So this is a depiction of the Carter solar field. This is the 800 kW system. Next slide. And based on where we are right now, and based on what we have done so far, we are looking forward to a microgrid, battery storage, and more solar in the Carter area. And it looks like my picture is not, no, well, here we go. So if you look to, if you look to the north there, those 3 lagoons are going to be redeveloped and repurposed, and we're hoping to put additional solar throughout there. That solar may be purposed to residential areas that are just on the other side of that area, or we're looking at battery storage and microgrid for the Carter Casino Hotel. So one of the things that I think FCPC has done a really good job of is look forward to the next steps after an individual project. Next slide. And this is a picture of the Health and Wellness Center solar array. Next slide. Next slide. And the executive building. Next slide. So in addition to the initial problems, we had some problems in 2019 with tornadoes and weather. And one of our systems was struck by lightning. So the reason that we're still in our reporting period right now is that we had to have a system in place where we could see what we were producing. And while we could look at the energy bills and extrapolate and know that we were producing energy, the lightning strike did take some of our system down, and we were unable to really track exactly what was going on with the system. Next slide. Next slide. So this is just a little bit about what those storms look like. Now, one of the things that we learned with these storms, obviously we talk a lot about climate change, and one of the things that I think is really important for all of us to consider when we're implementing these projects is that these projects aren't necessarily created in a perfect environment. And so I really encourage people to know your partners, know your warranties, and to plan for things like this. And so as we move forward in our planning, we know that solar works. We're almost at 100% for PCCH with this next round of installations. And so the next step for us is to better provide for that area and to be able to have a location that really is capable of going forward even after storms such as this. Next slide. So this is a sample of the production that we've been seeing so far, and the NAs at the bottom of that will kind of indicate again why it is that we're still reporting. Next slide. And now we come to the project for this year, the 2019 Community Scale Solar Project. Next slide. So this is, we are currently adding one additional megawatt of energy under the 2019 project. The project has been redeveloped a couple of times. We had some initial plans to provide solar power for the biodigester and for a couple of other facilities. What we found, though, was that those facilities would be more expensive than what we could recover in a payback period, but also there were challenges from a regulatory perspective with those as well. So the biodigester, because it's under a tariff, we cannot produce more energy than we are currently producing. So while I thought it was a great idea to make green energy with green energy, We Energies didn't really like my plan because it was cutting into their pocketbook a little bit. So next slide. So again, we have had to revise a couple of things. We've added a couple of new sites to take care of some of those tariff issues and engineering challenges, and we've enlarged other sites. So we've been able to increase again from about 1,008 kilowatts to 1,141. And our offsets will be anywhere between 10 and 100%. We did encounter some challenges with net metering. However, we were able to find several buildings that would fall in below that net metering requirement. So we are able to provide certain facilities with near 100% of their energy from solar. Next slide. So these are the individual installations, and the PVC installation is a roof installation, PCCH is as well, and then the majority of the others are ground installations. The Gamma campus installation is one that's really interesting. This facility is in the middle of urban Milwaukee and in the middle of a historic district. So that's a rather large installation for an urban environment. We are working through that and doing some planning changes with the city of Milwaukee. Certainly we have some agreements in place, even though it is trust land, we do have some agreements in place with the city to accommodate them and their regulatory structure. But we're really excited about that project. That is going to offset 2 separate buildings on the Gamma campus, and both buildings will be offset during the day at approximately 100%. Next slide. So initially, the tribe planned on using the 2013 and 2017 approach with the investment tax partner relationship. Now that lowers the tribe's capital investment, and the tribe then does receive outright ownership at the end of the tax recovery period. However, certain regulatory challenges have made that approach more difficult. The utilities have sued in state court to limit the ability of non-tax entities to partner with taxable entities to do these types of arrangements. So what the utilities are basically arguing is that the ITC partner becomes a utility and then must go through the process with PSC to become that utility. We certainly disagree with them, but we decided to avoid the challenges this year, and we will be using the traditional approach of buying the projects, the panels, and doing the installations outright without an investment tax credit partner. And what is interesting is that in this project, we are very much at the same level as the last 2 projects in terms of financing, but we are getting more solar installed. One of that is based on the fact that several of the installations are larger installations, but it's also based on the fact that the pricing for solar has just fallen so significantly. Next slide. So recently, we did go through the RFP process for the solar installer, and we have approved a contractor, and we are underway in the contracting process. Installations are planned. We've got the engineering planned. We've got the site selected, and everything is ready to go. We are finalizing the NEPA review in the city of Milwaukee area, again, with the historical district. We've got to go through a couple of additional steps with them, but we're moving along. We're getting interconnection agreements signed, and permits have been applied for. Power purchase agreements have been drafted. So we're doing some of the initial steps that we can do before we get to the part of actual implementation and installation. Next slide. So finally, we have the 4th project, the Community Center Solar and EEMs project. Next slide. This project is a really unique project for the tribe. The tribe decided a couple of years ago to develop a new community center, and that center was really designed with a focus on tribal members, giving them safe and good space for cultural education, for gathering, for wellness, social events, and really just to provide for a lifestyle for tribal members and to provide opportunity for those tribal members. So the construction of this project kind of intertwined perfectly with this grant cycle. And the tribe was able to apply for EEMs and solar for this community center. And we are able to increase the efficiency by adding EEMs that we may not otherwise have been able to afford. The center itself is designed based on FCPC culture. It very much follows the natural slope and grade of the land, and it's designed to be the least impactful possible to the land itself. And it is in the shape of an eagle taking flight. So we're really looking forward to the final product, but what we're going to talk about today is just where we are right now. Next slide. So this is the design of the project itself. Next slide. And this is the location, just steps away from all of the other government buildings. Next slide. So the project was designed with the tribe's environmental mission statement in mind and FCPC cultural values. We really wanted to minimize the demand for energy with the site, and we wanted it to pay for itself over its lifespan, if not sooner. And we wanted to use better technologies than what may have been deployed had we been paying for this project outright. And then also we had to design certain elements in order for them to be grant eligible. The tribe has a very significant interest in preserving the landscape to the extent possible. And one of the reasons for that is the nature of the area is such that it is so heavily treed that community members have really become enamored and really respect that environment. So we didn't want to discourage tribal members from visiting the community center, and we didn't want to create an instance where we were clear-cutting areas only to provide something that may then have become problematic. So when we designed not only the center, but also the EEMs and the solar was designed to be a rooftop structure rather than a ground mount, and also to be out of the line of sight. Next slide. And this is a depiction of what is going to be eventually. So most of the woodland remains. A very small portion was removed for the building itself. And you can see that the building actually goes right up to the trees in many of the areas. The stormwater pond was also designed to fit with the area and native plantings. And then also the biofiltration basin to avoid any runoff from getting into other water bodies. The northern Wisconsin area is an extremely water-dense area. So it was important to the tribe to control anything that might run off from that parking area. Next slide. So those initial EEMs, we've improved insulation in the walls and windows and roof, and then also under slabs. And we've improved pool, light, solar, and we're adding solar. But you can see that there is a 30-year cost savings from this project, from what we would have done had we not had the grant to what we will receive with the grant-funded EEMs. We'll save over 30 years, close to $3 million. So all in all, the payback period for the grant itself is 8 years for the EEMs and solar. Next slide. So it is 8 EEMs, and the actual combined annual savings has fluctuated a little bit as we've moved through the process. We were able to increase certain EEMs, others we had to slightly decrease, but all in all, we're still getting the same outcome from these EEMs and from the solar installation. Next slide. So this is, and again, expectations versus reality. Not everything moves perfectly. So although we had quotes for initial wall insulation, for example, we found that the final price was significantly more than what we had been originally quoted. However, then we found with windows that we were able to go with a different window and a different manufacturer and create a significant savings. So we've been very careful to look at things not only in terms of what we submitted in the grant, but also can we do better? Or if we've got lighting controls that we initially really under budgeted, but we then have another system that we find that we're saving significantly on, how can we continue to make sure that we get the efforts from the project that we intend while still being respectful of the dollars? Next slide. So where we are right now, the building exterior is nearing completion. The windows are almost installed. I believe we'll have our first meeting next month. And we continue to finish floors, walls, and all of the main areas. So we have had several interruptions with COVID, which I think everybody has probably said in their presentation so far. We were shut down for a number of days. We still have certain areas where we've had to quarantine specific crews. There have been some supply chain delays, but we're hopeful that COVID is not going to significantly affect construction completion. So while we have had some of those delays, we were able to stay on top of this project significantly. And to that end, we were able to gain some time prior to COVID becoming a real issue. Next slide. And so this is where we are today. As of my speaking, we are complete on a number of them. The pool has yet to be installed, so we have not done anything with the pool, and we have not yet done the solar installation. Next slide. The solar RFP did go out, and it has been approved and distributed. The bids are coming in right now. We expect that by February, we'll be able to contract with an appropriate and selected installer. And hopefully we'll be installing this summer. Next slide. So although the performance period began on October 1st, 2019, we had many of the, as we already discussed, we had many of the EEMs already designed. We were required to kind of redesign certain of those, but we have gotten past the majority of that, and we're still exploring other options based on some of the cost savings for additional EEMs. Next slide. So we are exploring additional HVAC controls, which is one thing that we did look at initially, but with a facility this size, it became a little bit difficult to know exactly what we would need until after we had some additional elements designed. Next slide. So this is just an example of what some of the EEMs will save over the course of their installation. Many of them are very quick paybacks, very, very quick turnarounds. And sometimes finding that money initially can be difficult, but when you look at it in terms of a 3-year payback with a utility savings of $54,000 annually over the life of the project, you start to realize how much you can save with some of these controls in place. Next slide. These are the lighting controls that we'll be using, which we have used throughout the other government buildings on the reservation as well. And impressively, and I think not to anybody's surprise, these pay themselves back very, very quickly. Next slide. And so this is my little soapbox moment. I wanted to say one thing about Tommy Jones and his work. He has done some significant and terrific work on the barriers to renewable energy on tribal properties. One thing I would like everybody to consider is that this doesn't just happen, and there are tools out there. Planning is so important, but there is also currently an extension on some of Tommy's work. One of the groups that I'm involved with, Mterra, is partnering with NREL to do some work to further study barriers, specifically with respect to solar. And I think that it's an important project because we have so many different regulatory systems across the country and so many different ways in which tribes are impacted by not only the regulatory systems, but also by climate or other different types of impacts. And so I'd really love to encourage everybody to find that project on Mterra and NREL's website and consider being a part of it. The more that we can figure out about some of this stuff, the more that we can really get good systems in place and help each other to create more and productive energy for many, many years to come for tribal reservations. Next slide. Oh, I forgot my thank you slide. But with that, I am done. I am on time. And I think that James is going to field questions.
Thank you, Sarah. I thought you did a fantastic job summarizing the 4 projects that you have with us. And it's an honor to work with you.
Oh, it's an honor to work with you
here today. And yeah, and thank you for providing the Sarah session for us today. And I will pass the floor or the virtual mic over to James Jensen. I think some people know James as a contractor to our office, and he is a project monitor, a great one, on some of our projects. And he's also been very instrumental in the monthly webinars that we have been holding for many years. So James, I will hand it over to you to moderate the questions.
Thank you, Tweety. We do have a few questions. We have a fair bit of time. So to the audience, please submit any questions that you do have, and we'll likely have time to get to them. All right, Sarah, I got the first one for you here, and that is, you mentioned the future plans for a microgrid. What's the motivation for a microgrid? What sort of benefits would you anticipate getting out of it?
I think it's it's a multifaceted approach. First of all, I do think that tribes are moving towards developing systems that are designed for resiliency and designed to provide them with space should they have impactful events such as a really disastrous storm. So this microgrid specifically would provide an area for tribal members to gather and would still supply heat, electric, and be able to supply food. That resiliency feature is important for tribes. Reservations are oftentimes at the end of lines, and if you have storms that take 5-6 days for power to come back up on, a microgrid can really help to alleviate some of those problems. Additionally, I think the microgrid approach is one that the tribe has considered because of the inability to do solar farms and the inability to make it economically feasible to develop a, let's say, 3-megawatt project a mile away and wheel the power. The installation of batteries would allow for continued use of facilities and would allow for the addition of more solar, for example, at PCCH, which would then help to eliminate grid purchase power in the evenings and at night.
Great, thanks, Sarah.
Absolutely.
A little bit of a follow-up, I think, and that is the specific question, can Forest County Potawatomi Community transport extra PV output over the city's power grid to a third-party buyer?
The only option that FCPC has is to sell directly to the utility. And again, that is at approximately 2.5 cents per kW. So we cannot, unless the tribe creates a utility, we cannot wheel based on the Wisconsin regulatory standards.
Great, thanks. I'm not 100% sure which project, and I don't know how you keep all 4 projects straight. This is referring to specifically, but did you have any challenges getting elders to buy into your lighting projects or your solar panel installation?
Yes. I think that, our initial, and we learned this in 2013. In 2013, I'm not going to say we made mistakes. I'm going to say we maybe were a little slow to get everybody on board. The 2013 project taught us that the very most important thing with any of these projects is for community support. And while we had approvals from Executive Council to get these things done, and while we all agree that solar energy is terrific, there were some challenges with different members who were disenfranchised with the cutting down of trees or with the change in the view shed with the solar panels. And so we had to really do a lot of education. We have not had as much of a problem with the EEMs. We really did a lot of outreach right away. We tried to engage early on and encourage and inform, not just about the benefits of the EEMs, but we also used it as an opportunity to discuss the tribe's platform in general and the tribe's reason for looking at both EEMs and green power generation. So we've really tried to be inclusive of the community earlier rather than later.
Great, thank you. Question here, can you share any of the jokes that you left out?
Well, I suggest everybody goes to the DOE website and looks at my my presentations from previous years. Because I do have so many different projects, I've always got little memes and quips in there somewhere. I think last year had a cat with the hang in there after 2 of them. I do try to keep it light, and unfortunately, I prefer so much more to speak in person.
Sure, yeah, and I'm sure they all rely on the context of the presentation, so it's hard to just throw the joke out here. Yeah.
Well, and I think the last slide was the Mel Gibson freedom slide from one of his movies. Because after 4 presentations, who doesn't want some freedom?
Sure. Is there any update on? And actually, I think you maybe touched on it on the legal case for the use of tax credits, investor tax credits for solar projects in Wisconsin.
Well, as many legal proceedings go, there are a number of motions back and forth, and it goes from a lower court to an upper court, gets sent back to the lower court, gets sent back to the upper court, and then back to the lower court. So right now, there is no update. Right now, they're still fighting. If I look at what happened in Iowa, I anticipate that if our court makes the right decision, they should come through on the side of the ITC arrangement and not the side of the utilities. However, that remains to be seen. Even with that sort of change, with that court decision, I think the bigger issue in Wisconsin right now is net metering. With a 20 kW net metering cap, you're really limited to very basic and small, whether it's residential or tiny little office structures, you're not getting much by way of opportunity for some of the larger scale developments. And with the utility structure as it is, the utilities have a real hold on not just the tribes, but anybody's abilities to install those larger systems and reap the benefits of them.
I guess following up on that or related to that, you mentioned the MTerra study or analysis looking at barriers to solar. Can you elaborate on, you asked for people to get involved or to look it up, but could you elaborate on what sorts of roles you might be looking for in terms of involvement, like what sort of input or I guess what is the opportunity?
Yes. So we're doing a series of, eventually what this project will do is create toolboxes or different kits and different pieces of information that tribes can use to help them develop these projects. And we're also looking specifically at regulatory barriers, which is a little difficult because tribes are in a lot of different states, and those regulatory barriers are different in each and every one. But what we're doing right now is using a series of questionnaires and open discussions to talk about what tribes, first of all, see as those barriers. And then we're working not only with tribes, but also utilities, regulators, and a number of other stakeholders. So there are a lot of different opportunities for input. And I know, I worked with one tribe in northern Minnesota, and they have a very different system because they're partnering with a co-op, and that co-op isn't subject to the same regulatory barriers as, for example, a state utility. So one of the challenges of this project is going to be to understand who it is that tribes are working with and what it is those individual circumstances look like for those tribes. So the more tribes that get involved, the more we can really dive into the specifics in those areas.
Great, thank you for that. A question here, I think you mentioned EV charging. Can you elaborate more on the use? Are those public EV charging stations, and will they help offset or alleviate the need for selling solar back to the utility?
Well, all of our projects right now are sized so that we do not sell back to the utility. In very few cases, we sell a minimal amount back to the utility. So all of the EV stations are designed to work with whatever solar is currently there. And while they may take, a portion of that solar, they're not going to greatly offset what the individual building is receiving. The EV stations that the tribe currently has are for public use. It's difficult because there are different programs under which you can get grants for EV stations. So certain of them cannot be limited to, for example, a tribal reservation. They have to be available to any member of the public at any time. Others can be installed within an individual parking complex. So the EV stations, it really comes down to how you're funding them and what exactly the goals for that specific station are.
Great, thank you. We've got a couple more here. Your microgrid or your concept of a future microgrid, how big would it be, and what sort of financial metrics would you use to evaluate it?
So the microgrid would incorporate the PCCH area. The PCCH area is the Potawatomi Carter Casino Hotel, and next to that hotel and casino, there is also a C-store. There are some residences not too far away, just a handful of buildings in a relatively condensed area. One of the things that FCPC has issue with for some of these projects is the distance between different locations, buildings. So it doesn't always make sense right now to design those microgrids until we go through some additional steps. But with the PCCH area, with the 800 kW system that we installed through the 2017 grant, and let me just look it up here. I think this year's installation is another 255 kW. So that's over 1 megawatt just at PCCH alone, providing a very near complete use for that area, or for that one building. So if we can continue to install a little bit of additional solar to hit the 100% mark for the other buildings, and then provide some battery storage, we'll be able to have a condensed area that provides resiliency in the future. And again, these buildings are right next door to each other.
Great, thank you. Just one last one here, and let's get others. It wasn't clear in your presentation if 1 megawatt project, solar system project centralized and require more distribution lines, or will it be decentralized specific buildings?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, I can. Was the 1 megawatt solar system discussed a centralized project requiring additional distribution lines, or was it decentralized to multiple areas?
So all of our projects are distributive generation on individual facilities. So the first project, the 2013 project, that was approximately 1 megawatt on 13 buildings. The second project, the 2017 project, is 1 megawatt distributed between 3 buildings. And again, all of those are distributed generation. So there was no additional infrastructure by way of connection needed. Our goal so far has been able to do DG projects and to get as close to we can as 100% for each of the individual buildings. And again, that comes back to many of the regulatory challenges in the area. So the projects are designed and implemented on individual structures and solely for those structures.
Thanks, Sarah. With that, I don't see any further questions. So we'll pass it back to Lizana to close us out here.
Thank you, James, and thank you, Sarah, so much. I know that was a lot of talking. You did really well. So,
not nearly as fun this year.
No, not at all. So, okay. Well, thank you, James, and thank you, Sarah, again. This concludes the session, this session of the program review. If you're attending the next session, you will have to join using the link and call-in number you received when you registered for that session. We will start the next session at 2:40. So hope to see you there. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.